Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. Bad Bunny was one of the world's highest paid musicians last year, and now he is set to take center stage at the Super Bowl halftime performance at Super Bowl 60. What will this do for his earnings in 2026, and how will it boost his star power overall? Joining us to discuss is my colleague Matt Craig, the Forbes LA based entertainment reporter. Matt, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Maggie. Really appreciate this conversation. And it's really exciting because obviously the Super Bowl is one of the biggest events of the year, not just for the football. I think for a lot of folks, it's more of a media event than a football game.
Indeed, it is. And in fact, I know I have to go grocery shopping at some point on Sunday, and I was thinking, could I go during a commercial break or during halftime? But absolutely not. I don't want to miss what is about to happen. And so, speaking of, Bad Bunny had a tremendously successful year last year. As you've reported, he earned $66 million, was one of Spotify's top artists, if not the top artist. Is that correct?
The number one most streamed artist on Spotify globally. Yes.
Globally. And of course, this past Sunday, he won Album of the Year at the Grammys. He's really on a hot streak. So, how will the Super Bowl add to that?
Well, I mean, the Super Bowl is nothing short of the biggest stage in all of entertainment, not just music. And I mean, the fact that they've been able to line up really any artist they've wanted to over the past decade just tells you exactly how powerful that is, especially without the financial incentive that I know we're going to talk about. Still, all these artists want to play the Super Bowl, and so if you're Bad Bunny, you're the number one most streamed artist globally. But you're also, you're 31 years old and you're kind of still rising in your career. And so this is not just the biggest 15-minute commercial for you and all that you stand for, but also, puts you in a very prestigious and exclusive club of halftime performing artists. I think in a lot of ways, this used to be seen as like a career capstone. It was a lot of like older artists, having already accomplished everything. And recently, it's been something closer to a springboard, younger artists or still ascendant artists that have used the Super Bowl to then take their career to new heights. And obviously, he still is building toward bigger and better things.
And we'll get into how that's manifested for the past few artists who've performed. But let's cut to the chase. How much money will Bad Bunny earn from doing the Super Bowl halftime show?
Yes, the answer is not zero, but it's extremely close. The NFL and Apple Music don't pay their artists to perform for the Super Bowl. He will be receiving a SAG-AFTRA mandated minimum. For Usher a few years ago, it was like $671. So something in that ballpark. For Bad Bunny, essentially negligible. And on top of that, a lot of Super Bowl artists, we don't know in the case of Bad Bunny, but past Super Bowl artists have invested additional money on top of the budget that the NFL and Apple are willing to put up for the show in order to increase the spectacle, make it as big and as grand as possible. So, in a lot of cases, artists lose money performing on the Super Bowl, which is crazy until you realize the boost that you mentioned before that all artists receive from playing the game. I mean, hundreds of percentage boost on their Spotify streams. Obviously, like if you're Rihanna and you can sneak in a Fenty Beauty, plug, then that can, raise the profile of that brand. And so, yeah, there is more than enough things to make it worth it for these artists. And like I said, the fact that they have been able to get these artists despite not paying them shows that everyone thinks it's absolutely worth it without the payday.
The piece in your story that talked about how artists have invested their own money and resources into making it a bigger spectacle was surprising to me, and perhaps it shouldn't be. We cover this every year, but how much money have we seen other artists pour into that show? And do the NFL and Apple Music contribute nothing to that?
So the NFL and Apple Music cover the cost of the show, or at least up to a point. And I think that in the case of most artists, they cover the entire expense of the show. We don't know exactly what that would be. I think using comps to like what a Coachella headlining show would be, I'm thinking roughly in the range of around $10 million to put one of these shows on. But artists like The Weeknd and then Dr. Dre and all the artists that performed at the LA Super Bowl a few years ago said they put an additional $7 million of their own money into that show to really supersize it, to really make it everything that they want. And that's not as uncommon as you would think. I did a story a few years ago on Metro Boomin, who, when he was going to perform at Coachella, invested, I think it was about $5 million of his own money into that show. And I think these artists see that really you do these huge performances not for paydays, but just for maximum exposure. For Metro Boomin, he's going to play at Coachella. That's taking my, public stature to another level, and I want to make sure I capitalize on that with something that's going to be extremely memorable. And so, yeah, in the case of, Dr. Dre, they're riding in a car across the stage. You have 50 Cent hanging upside down. All these crazy things. I think everyone remembers the weekend going through that tunnel of lights where he was, like walking very dazed and confused through that. So these are memorable moments that we remember. We remember Katy Perry riding the elephant that was like metallic, or Lady Gaga coming down from the top of the stadium. And so, these kind of like once in a lifetime moments as an artist, you really want to take advantage of them. And again, like I said, you have essentially the entire country and a large portion of the world all watching you either live or, on YouTube the next day. And so you really, really want to make the best impression possible.
Or in the years since. I have watched the Rihanna performance choreographed by Paris Goebel so many times because that dance, it was so clean. That choreography was so sharp, and as a dancer, it's one of my favorite in recent memory. But you mentioned it's basically a 15-minute commercial. What are the ad rates this year? So what would that translate to for Bad Bunny, just performing for 15 minutes and not even counting the replays that you and I are just talking about?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's no ad breaks during the show, so Bad Bunny doesn't get any economics of that. However, the thing I will say is when Nielsen reports out, how many people watch the Super Bowl each year, the halftime performance is oftentimes the high point of that. Like I think last year was around like 118 million for the game average, but then the halftime performance was like 135 million. So people tune in for the halftime show. Even people who, that there's a very small percentage, but who aren't watching the game, then tune in and make sure they watch the halftime show. So it really is like the peak of it. And I'm sure if you look at the ad rates, I don't know if we've seen it this year yet, but every year we do get that, how much a 30-second spot in the Super Bowl could be. I wonder if those spots around before and after the halftime show are even more expensive, because it really, in a lot of ways, is kind of like the centerpiece of the game. Well, literally, it's the centerpiece of the game, but for a lot of folks, that is kind of like the highlight of the game. And so, yeah, you really have the entire world's attention. I mean, you can't, in some ways, really put a full number on what the exposure of the Super Bowl game is. You can say, if you're Nielsen, that 135 million people are watching it concurrently. That kind of is a fuzzy number based on what we're guessing some co-viewing is, or in large venues, how many people could be watching. Mm-hmm. And then you get, another 150, 200 million views on YouTube. So that's more people. I think with Bad Bunny, there's the global aspect of it. And so my point is you can't even really quantify exactly how many people will see this show if you're Bad Bunny. Just know that it will be the most of your entire career. So you really, really want to showcase the best of yourself.
Now, your story does get into the streamings boost and the touring boost that Kendrick Lamar received after his halftime performance last year. Can you share what you found there?
Yes, Spotify is very proud to put out each year kind of what the streaming boost is before and after the Super Bowl game. And oftentimes it's in the 3, 4, or 500% increases for a lot of these artists. Last year, Kendrick Lamar as an artist only went up 175% because he was kind of already on fire before the Super Bowl. But his song "Not Like Us" went up 430% in streams after the game. And like I said, think about all the people who have probably streamed Bad Bunny in the lead up to the Super Bowl. So those numbers are probably already rising. So from that point to after the game, again, quadrupling your streams, and that's a temporary thing. I mean, that won't be, of course, your new normal, you could say, but obviously both a direct financial benefit from that, although a lot of artists would say not enough. They get fractions of a penny for each one of those streams, right? But not only that, yeah, it raises your profile. Like you mentioned, Kendrick Lamar, who went on a stadium tour last summer after the Super Bowl game with SZA, and really there haven't been I mean, you could say Eminem, but he was with other artists. There haven't really been a lot of hip hop artists who have been able to sell out stadiums. And Kendrick Lamar and SZA had, the second highest grossing concert tour of 2025 on the back of the Super Bowl show, only behind Beyonce, who is pretty good at selling tickets. So I think you can make absolute one-to-one, direct comparisons or translations between playing the Super Bowl game, raising your profile, and being able to do things like play stadium shows or, stream more music.
Now, of course, Bad Bunny did have a very successful night at the Grammys. Does that complicate the math at all? Is it possible to disentangle the boost he'll get from the Grammys, and he's already getting, versus the boost he's getting from the Super Bowl?
I leave that to Spotify. Just know that Bad Bunny is kind of the artist of the moment. I mean, if you think about it, he won the biggest prize at the Grammys. It was a historic win because it was the first Spanish language album to win Album of the Year. Now he will be the first Spanish language performer to perform at the Super Bowl. So he's doing things that are, historic. But he is at the absolute center of music culture right now. It turned out to be a very good selection, and we can kind of parse exactly why, but he is the guy in music right now, and so it kind of makes sense that he's going to be playing the Super Bowl. Yes, there will be kind of a multiplying effect of all those things that people who maybe have heard of him or haven't heard of him are like, wow, this guy, one album of the year. This guy played at the Super Bowl. I may need to give his songs a try.
Now, you talked about there are certain reasons why the NFL chose Bad Bunny. The commercial appeal is certainly one. Now, the President of the United States is none too happy with this decision, and we know that far-right political organization Turning Point USA is doing their own alternative halftime show. Why do you think the NFL chose Bad Bunny, knowing that, I don't want to use the word divisive, but knowing that there are some people who will choose to turn off the TV instead of those who choose to tune in right at halftime?
Yeah, I think it was clearly a strategic choice on the part of the NFL. They're smart enough to know beforehand that this would have, turned some heads. Roger Goodell in a press conference when he was kind of defending the Bad Bunny choice said that every year the halftime performer sparks some controversy. Like I remember last year, it was, oh, Kendrick Lamar, is he gonna call Drake a pedophile on TV and be liable? Is the network gonna be liable for that? So I feel like there is a little controversy each year. This year, yeah, on top of Bad Bunny kind of being the artist of the moment, as we mentioned, the stakes are ratcheted up because of the political tension, especially around Hispanic immigrants, and Bad Bunny has a predominantly Hispanic fan base. He's literally said he's not going to tour his current world tour in the United States because he's worried about his fans being detained by ICE outside of his concerts. There now is potentially an ICE presence outside of the Super Bowl. It's kind of there's gone back and forth about confirming that, but a lot of folks presume that will be the case. And so, yeah, it is on one hand, you would think a pretty divisive choice from the NFL. However, I think that they do the math of that, the pluses and minuses, and come out that there's far more pluses because Bad Bunny, of course, is a huge artist in the United States, but even more so in the Spanish-speaking world outside of the United States. And for the NFL, their kind of next great frontier is international expansion. They're already playing more games internationally. They've played them in Europe, but they've also played them in Brazil and Mexico. The presumption is they will play more games out of the United States. And I mean, in some ways, they're approaching a saturation point. I think they're far from it, but of how much money they can tap out of the United States as far as media rights, as far as, merchandise, fandom, things like that. And so their next way to keep making more money is going to be to sell in international markets. And when you have a huge global star like Bad Bunny, you're kind of choosing to appeal to those fans first and foremost. And it will be interesting to see what metrics we can use to quantify that. Like, will there be more YouTube views of the show after the fact, or will there be Nielsen ratings in international markets that we haven't seen before? Either way, the NFL will be closely tracking, what picking an artist like Bad Bunny will do for its international fans, and maybe at the expense of some fans in the United States. Certainly have a certain political persuasion. However, I don't think that Kid Rock performing at the Turning Point counter programming halftime show is much of a threat to Bad Bunny's audience.
I will be really curious to see those international Nielsen numbers. I'm also curious to see what happens on stage. So I have to ask, Matt, in all of your reporting, do you have any sense of what Bad Bunny might be singing, saying, doing? We know that Green Day is also going to be appearing. What do we know about the show itself?
Yeah, they've obviously kept that under tight wraps. I think it goes without saying that there will be something in the show. I mean, Green Day has already been very vocal in some of their concert performances, calling out people by name and maybe being a little bit more mean-spirited about it. I think the thing about Bad Bunny, and he even said this in his Grammys acceptance speech, is that the only way to fight hate is with love. And the NFL and the statements they've put out is saying it will be a unifying show. I don't know if that is necessarily the case, but Bad Bunny has not been mean spirited or aggressive in his comments, but he has been vocal in pretty much every opportunity where he's gotten a big stage. So there will be, I guess I can't say that definitively. There almost certainly will be, some statement or some visual or something in the show that will directly address the ICE situation, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country. And I guess you could also say Bad Bunny's very presence and the fact that he's performing in Spanish are in themselves political statements. I don't think that Bad Bunny will come out in a very, very aggressive way or, a way that would be overly provocative. However, I could see Green Day doing that. They have been, and kind of that is their brand to some degree too, is anti-establishment. And so, yeah, the combination of the two, there will almost certainly be things that the president will not agree with. He's actually not coming to the game, which he came to the game last year, and he said it is too far away. But I also think that there will be things potentially directly addressing some of his policies.
And perhaps indirectly too. I know last year's show there was a lot of subtext that made for excellent rewatching for those who wanted to analyze the subtext. Now, typically in these conversations about global performers with global platforms, when we talk about speaking out politically, we talk about that as being a threat to their businesses, to their entrepreneurship, to any side businesses they have, the revenue that they're earning from touring. What do you think speaking out against ICE at the Grammys and potentially at the Super Bowl will do, either positive or negative, for Bad Bunny's career?
Yeah, this was an interesting thing while reporting the story out and talking to some folks that have either collaborated with him or followed his career really closely, taught college courses on his career. And they think that the more political he's gotten over recent years, actually, the more popular he's gotten. Not just like, the situation in the United States, but situation in a lot of Spanish speaking countries. They feel like they can really identify with Bad Bunny, and the fact that he has doubled down on his, Puerto Rican heritage, on the Spanish language, doing interviews almost exclusively in Spanish. People feel like he has, embraced his identity and not necessarily tried to flatten it out or broaden it to a more mainstream or I guess you could say white audiences, in the United States. I think people really, really appreciate that. The other thing I would say is he's the number one globally streamed artist. He's doing this tour outside the United States. In a lot of ways, he has kind of created a sustainable career without needing to tour in the United States and do those kinds of things. So there's less ways in which the current administration could, harm his career if they, are on the other side of, his political statements. And so, yeah, I think that he has been smart, but I also think he's just been authentic, to who he is, and the Spanish-speaking fans have really backed him because of that. I think that's why the more political he's gotten, the more support that he has received, is because people think, okay, he's with us, he's representing us, and he's not trying to, play both sides or cater to, maybe where the deeper pockets are. He can make $66 million last year without necessarily needing the sort of like mainstream support in the United States.
Bad Bunny appeared on the 30 under 30 list a few years ago, and as you noted at the top of the conversation, he is ascendant right now. What else are you expecting him to do this year? What will you be watching for in his business and in his earnings?
Yeah, it's interesting. doesn't in the same way Rihanna, like Fenty Beauty, for example, he doesn't have any brands that he's necessarily launched himself. He has taken investments in some sports teams, in some companies, but not in any sort of operational way. Generally, artists, when they reach a certain level of not just money, but influence, that's something that they do. One thing I hope he does is does more acting. He was in two movies in 2025, and he was pretty good in both of them. One, Happy Gilmore 2, a movie that I didn't necessarily care for, but he was really funny. He's obviously been funny on Saturday Night Live. But also he was in a Darren Aronofsky movie, Caught Stealing, where he played a serious role as kind of a gangster, Puerto Rican gangster, and he was good in that. So personally, as a movie lover, I would love to see him on screen more. And we're seeing, Charlie XCX at the movies. It's kind of more of a trend that artists are wanting to appear in movies. So I would personally love that. From a financial standpoint, that's not the most lucrative route for him. He can make a ton more money selling out stadiums and doing more music. And certainly, like when you play a Super Bowl, you are a stadium level artist. A lot of his world tour, some are in stadiums, some are in arenas, but he will be leveling that up at least for the foreseeable future. The one thing that with him that will be interesting to watch is again, if you're 20 years removed from the Super Bowl, will the effect still last? We haven't really seen an artist this young, play on this level of a stage, and to see like how long the Super Bowl effect, can boost their career. And obviously it will depend on, music and what comes after. But yeah, he obviously has the world at his feet at this point after playing the Super Bowl, after winning Album of the Year. So yeah, he can basically decide, write his own ticket of what he wants to do in business.
Bad Bunny can write his own ticket in terms of what he wants to do in business. Well, for those who want to follow that business and all the business of entertainment, follow Matt Craig on Forbes.com. And Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your reporting, as always.
It was a pleasure. I'm excited for the game.